And welcome to the webinar. Today's webinar is Making a Plan for Cybersecurity Awareness. And oh, by the way, October is Cybersecurity Awareness Month. Just a couple of housekeeping tips before we get started. In the file pod on the lower left-hand corner of your screen, there are three downloadable files. The first is a copy of the slides for today. The other two are resources that will be discussed during the webinar. As always, you're welcome to ask questions during the webinar, and we will attempt to get as many of those as we can answered at the end of the program. There is CME available for today for those of you who need CME. It is one AMA PRA Category 1 credit, and it has been designated as 1 credit for medical ethics and/or professional responsibility. Following the program, you will receive an email in the next 24 hours that will have a link to the evaluation for the program. Your feedback is very important to us, and we would appreciate it if you would take a few minutes and fill that out when you receive the email. Also, CME certificates will be emailed out to participants within 10 business days. A recording of the webinar will be available on TMLT's Resource Hub as well as on the InReach CME website as well, so that you will be able, people will be able to get CME by watching the webinar through the CME website. My name is Kathy Bryant, and I'm the manager of TMLT Cyber Consulting Services. Every year, we try to do something around cybersecurity during October's webinar for Cybersecurity Awareness Month. However, we've gotten some feedback that it sure would be nice if we did not have, if you could have that information earlier. So, in an effort to do that, we're doing our cybersecurity awareness in the uh, in the month of September instead of October. Joining me for today's presentation is Anthony Pasalacqua, and Tony will introduce himself in just a moment when he begins speaking. Just as a reminder, Tony and I do not have any financial relationships with ineligible companies to disclose, nor do TMLT staff, planners, and reviewers. Our objectives for today are to have you become more familiar with commonly reported cyber incidents, to determine how to implement prevention and mitigation steps to minimize the effects of cyber events on your practice, and lastly, to review some cyber awareness training resources and things you may want to consider adding to your program. Can't hardly start a program about cybersecurity awareness without starting with the HIPAA security rule that requires that you implement a security awareness and training program for all members of your workforce, including management. Now, that does not mean you do some sort of webinar, any or some sort of training when an employee first comes on board. Of course, you need to do that. Under Texas law, you have to do it within the first 30 days. However, the HIPAA security rule goes on to say that you have to have ongoing uh, periodic security updates. You also have to document when you do this training, just like any other in service training that you do. And so hopefully by the end of today, you'll have some great ideas to do that periodic training. So there are three very common cyber incidents that are reported to TMLT. The first is a combination of social engineering, often phishing, that results in a ransom attack. The second is cyber deception, and the third is business interruption. And we'll talk a little bit more about each of those. If you look at the data from the Office for Civil Rights, or the HIPAA police, as we lovingly like to call them, they have identified the following trends and raised them as concerns from the investigations that they are actually in the process of doing or have completed. Ransomware, phishing attacks, remote desktop vulnerabilities, weak authentication, both as single factor authentication and poor passwords, and access controls for current and former workforce members. I will tell you that the OCR in the last year has started settling hacking and ransom attack open investigations. And I will tell you that most of those are taking many years to go from the time they were reported until the time of resolution. So, sorry. Net Diligence is an organization that gathers cyber data from multiple insurance carriers and tries to compile them and look at broader trends. And their 2024 report just came out a couple of weeks ago. And I think it's rather affirming that they say 84% uh, of all the claims are caused by ransomware. 10% are caused by business email compromise, which is a part of a broader category of cyber deception. Hacking is 5%, and fraudulent funds transfer is 4.5%. Tony, would you like to do a deeper dive into social engineering?
I would love to. Yeah. So, social engineering, for anyone who isn't aware of the term just yet, is a form of psychological manipulation that tricks users into making security mistakes or giving away sensitive information. It relies on human error instead of vulnerabilities in software and operating systems by exploiting human emotions. It's a huge part of it. So the major ones that we're looking at today is phishing, spear phishing, and smishing. But I just wanted to let everyone know there's also vishing. And one of the latest ones that we're starting to see an uptick in is something called QR ishing, which is taking the QR codes and then essentially cutting out the QR code and putting it over an existing QR code so that it takes you to the wrong website. So the next part here that I wanted everyone to look at is, oops, that's automating for some reason. Sorry about that. Okay, so if you didn't see the answers there, I just wanted to go ahead and bring up a phishing example. So I'm going to give everyone just a few minutes. You may have seen everything get highlighted, but if not, just look at that and see if there's anything that you can identify that would make it seem suspicious or that it would be a phishing email. Okay. So we're going to go ahead and go over this together. So one of the first things that you're looking at is, again, the human emotion component of this. So your account has been limited. That's going to cause a lot of people to have a huge sense of urgency, right? Okay, if I don't have the ability to access my PayPal account, it may be unable to access my funds, right? So the interesting thing is that inside of phishing emails, they're going to usually give you some links that's going to guide you to an exact website that's going to have maybe like a potential replica of the actual legitimate website. By clicking the login screen, you may have something that looks exactly like the screen that it would look like for PayPal. The goal, though, is that as you are inputting your information, they're capturing not only your password but your credentials as well, your username, and then that allows them to access it later. So we like to refer to this as the trick. And then this last part here is there's always some form of reassurance that's going to allow you to say, okay, maybe this is worthwhile for me to do. So they usually say this is something that we're doing to make it safer for you to be online. Just click on the link. There's usually some grammatical errors. And this part here is what you're going to usually see with the reassurance side. Now, there's something that's very interesting here that I wanted to bring to everyone's attention. If you look just slightly underneath there, you'll see something that states, "We appreciate your cooperation and assistance. Yours sincerely." There's definitely something missing there. So this is going to jump into the next part of our phishing checklist. We love to use resources from all over, but this one comes from Health and Humans or HHS 405D. So there's some key things that you want, and I would highly suggest you take this part of the PowerPoint and put it up with your employees that are maybe dealing with phishing as a constant threat to their day-to-day operations. So if you don't recognize the sender, that's always a huge red flag. I know with a lot of patient care, you may not identify a lot of the senders the majority of the time if they're being sent in. You just kind of want to think through it first before you click on anything. If you're not expecting an attachment or an email, that's also something that you want to look at as well. Tremendous amount of phishing emails have an attachment. It could be anything from a PDF file all the way down to an Excel sheet. What they're doing is they're embedding malicious code inside of those documents so that as you click on it, it's downloading straight into your computer system, and that seems to be one of the main vectors. So, does the from address match the message? And so, one of the huge things that we're starting to see now is the from. You can change the display name inside of any sort of email to state whoever it's from, but the actual domain, that's going to be a little bit more difficult to change. So you want to make sure they both match up. Does this invoke a sense of urgency? That's just completely working on the human emotion side. If there's a sense of urgency, you have a tendency of being more easily manipulated because you're not going to think through the entire situation and ask yourself, is this something that I need to take care of right now? You also want to make sure that you can recognize the destination URL. In some instances, these URLs are going to lead to some long string that's really hard to identify. Usually not very common with some of your more popular websites. And is the standard internal procedure, is there a standard internal process or procedure for the IT issues? This is just going back to sometimes if you identify a phishing email that's coming across, maybe your IT department and or your IT procedures are to flag that. So then that way you can take that off of any other employees that may have received the same email. Is this website secure? Just look for the S part of that. Just think of that as secure. Is the email asking for your login credentials? Just like that last one. Is there any bad grammar or spelling? We're seeing kind of a huge uptick in this as AI becomes more intelligent. We're seeing less and less spelling errors. And then the last one there is the greeting signature generic or lack contact information. And a great example was that last slide that we just had. So ransomware poses a threat to you and your devices, but what makes this a form of malware that's so special is the word ransom. So ransom is the extortion software that locks down your networks, computers, and files, and then demands ransom for its release. In simple terms, malware gains access to the device, usually by phishing emails, and depending on the type of ransomware, either the entire operating system or it could just be the individual files that are encrypted. A ransom is then demanded from the victim. So, just some basic facts here. Ransomware incidents can severely impact businesses, processes, and leave organizations without the data that they need to operate and deliver mission critical services. Malicious actors are often well, they're becoming more sophisticated as time continues to move on because, well, the software itself is becoming much more complex and sophisticated. And the delivery mechanisms, they're becoming more fine tuned as they continue to learn from mistakes from the past. Ransomware incidents have become more destructive and impactful in nature and scope. And some interesting facts here is that ransomware demands in some cases has exceeded over $1 million. So, impacts to your organization. Obviously, there's the monetary impact of having to pay that ransom. Potential impacts from to reputation. A lot of the times we hear feedback that, or just from a generalized feeling from myself from being part of or exposed to several ransomware attacks. I always get those letters that come in and say, "Hey, your information may have been released to the dark web." You always get that feeling like, I wonder if they have, is that organization able to protect my information in the future? So reputational harm is always huge. Permanent closure of organizations, especially smaller ones. We have seen some reports and some news articles in the past that have shown that these smaller physician practices, especially if they can't pay their ransomware payments, some of them are just closing their doors, and some of them are retiring. Lost or deleted files. One of the huge things that we sometimes hear is that, oh, well, if I pay the ransom, I'll get 100% of my files back. The interesting thing is that's not necessarily true. As the files are being encrypted when ransomware is deployed, there's always some files that are either lost or, in some instances, they're unable to be decrypted. And the files that are unable to be decrypted, those ones are the ones that you typically lose. Delay or cancellations of patient care procedures, testing, etc., and then system shutdowns, potentially crippling the network system and forcing manual transactions wherever it's possible. So it makes you feel like you're a little bit overwhelmed and that there's nothing you can do. But there are some specific things that you can do to help protect against ransomware attacks. Backups, you want to make sure that you are performing it in a 3-2-1. That's what we're huge fans of. That's three backups, two online, one offline. So we're huge fans of all three. The main reason is that sometimes both of your online backups can be simultaneously hit, and so that offline backup may literally be your last backup that you have in order to get everything operational. You also want to make sure that you have your IT department employ technology that prevents any sort of unapproved software from running. The most simplest way that we see this actually occurring is where if you're handing out a laptop to a new employee, instead of giving them a laptop that has administrative accesses, you're just actually allowing them to have access to the laptop, and then you create a user profile. And what that does is it prevents anyone from being able to just download random software onto your computer system. It also limits the ability for someone to maneuver and move through your laptop as well if they do gain access to it, like a cyber criminal. You also want to keep your operating system up to date as well as all software. This is kind of an interesting one, and we talk about this a lot in other presentations, but the updates that you're pushing, I know a lot of us call them downgrades, but those upgrades that you're pushing, they actually provide a roadmap to cyber criminals on exactly what vulnerabilities are being patched when those upgrades are being performed. If you are not running those upgrades, then what's happening is those individuals actually know exactly how to break into your system. The vulnerabilities are not all the same. Some of them are very weak and they're not super, they're not going to create a lot of issues for you, but some of them are very high. So if an individual was to exploit it, they can actually take over your administrative privileges. You also want to make sure that you're maintaining antivirus and anti malware software. Endpoint protection is definitely something you want to look into. And then don't allow staff to enable macros on email attachments. This is kind of an interesting one, but it goes back to the way that you can embed viruses into Excel sheets as well as other documents. Having macros enables just allows them to use Excel like a little mini version of software. Develop policies and procedures on safe handling of email attachments. Definitely educate your workforce as often as you can. We'll talk a little about this more in the presentation. And then report the ransomware attempt to cyber insurance carriers, local police, as well as the FBI. And have a data recovery plan and test it. So you want to make sure you're doing that. We have heard from a few community members that if they would not have tested their restore from backup, they actually ran out of storage, and so they actually had about 2 to 3 months worth of information that was not actually being backed up. So this one here is a great resource again. So prepare, react, and recover from ransomware. Uh, Pull this one from the slide presentation later on and go through it. It's a really good outline that's going to give you some good guidance on what to do. The general users and medical practitioners, that whole column there is really great. But what I want to bring everyone's attention to is practice pen and paper operations to maintain uh, hard copies of patient data. And so one of the big things is if your system does get hit by ransomware, it tends to cripple the organization for a minimum of 3 days, up to 2 weeks. We usually hear is about the length of time it takes before a lot of the basic operations can come back online. And it can take up to 6 months to a year before everything is operating at the same efficiency as before. So having paper and pen backups is a great way of being able to stay ahead of that. New patient packets and just having some boxes that maybe have some basic forms that you need to perform your day-to-day operations is just a great way to have a backup in the event that you do lose access to your entire computer system. So what to do if you're infected with ransomware? So you want to try to do the best you can to isolate those computers as quickly as possible. Uh, what we sometimes hear from some individuals is that they shut down the computers because they're like, well, if I shut it down, then I can stop the process. And if I stop the process, then it's not going to work anymore. That's not necessarily true. Once it hits that system, if it's starting to encrypt it and you take it offline, you stop it halfway through the encryption. What that sometimes means is that if you do get the decryption key and you start to try to use that key to decrypt everything going backwards, if something was only half encrypted, those files can sometimes become corrupted. So you want to make sure that you do not shut off your computer. You just want to make sure that you're severing the connections in between each one. You also want to make sure that you notify IT or MSSPs. One of the other things that we sometimes hear is that in order to get you operational again, some of your IT departments and MSSPs that you're working with, they may think to themselves, well, I can get you up and operational in 3 hours. So all I need to do is take this server offline, bring your other backup online, and then we'll wipe the other server that was infected and then turn that into the new backup. The issue is that you do not want to get rid of the forensic data on that. Health and Human Services states very um, specifically that in the event that the burden of proof lies on the practice or the covered entity to prove what type of variant of malware or in this case ransomware that's on the system. And so this is where kind of like healthcare and IT kind of meet together. There are different variants of ransomware that does exist out there. So some of the ransomwares there are no decryption keys for. Some other ransomwares that exist out there, they do have the decryption keys for them, but some of them will only encrypt the data on site, whereas some of the other ones may actually encrypt the data on site and exfiltrate it and send it to a different server to be sold later. So just understanding that and understanding that there's different forensic data that's out there that could be valuable to you in your investigation is really crucial. You also want to make sure that you immediately secure any backup data or systems by taking them offline and ensuring backups are free of malware. And notify your cyber insurance carrier and contact law enforcement and FBI immediately. And as always, keep copious notes as you're going through this entire process. So passwords, this one here is one of our favorite topics. It's really kind of light. So individual logins, huge. Make sure that you're not having a bunch of individuals sharing the same computer logins. We see that with like nursing stations and things like that. Makes it very difficult forensically to identify who's doing what on what computer system. Complex passwords are huge, and you want to enforce sanction policies for sharing passwords. So just jumping into the complex passwords, uh, the longer and the more complex your password, the greater the length of time. Kathy and I always say that passwords is maybe a more of an anchoring strategy that we should have moved away from a long time ago. We should really be using passphrases. It's the fastest way to increase the length of a password. And passwords or words in general are utilized as part of the brute force attack method. So hackers have said, hey, we have an entire dictionary over here full of words. Why don't we use all those words first and try to break into it that way? And so by having more than one word, you just make it that much more complex. So here's the last one here. Time to crack passwords. You can see that anything that's really under about 5 minutes or 5 characters, no matter what the complexity is, instantly can be broken. And there are multiple essentially guides out there or password sheets like this that are going to give you a breakdown of both the rows and columns to give you the total length of time that it's going to take for someone to be able to break into your system. And these times, by the way, keep going down. So year over year, if you've heard in the past, 8 characters was what you needed. That may have been true 5, 10 years ago, but now it's only 8 hours to break that specific password. All right, Kathy, did you want to take over for cyber deception and business email compromise?
Sure. This topic is one that wasn't on a lot of people's radars until probably the last year to year and a half. Um, it seems as though the bad guys, the cyber threat actors, keep coming up with new ways to figure out how to steal money from the practice. And in this case, cyber deception, sometimes called wire transfer fraud, in can have different ways that it happens. Fraudulent instruction, or the practice gets an email asking them to change the bank routing instructions for either an individual, such as a physician in the group, or for a vendor. Business email compromise is slight social engineering that comes uh, specifically over email. And this type of trick may or may usually does not contain malware, but it may have email attachments that you need to be aware of. Examples. Would your payroll clerk or accounting staff, whoever handles accounts payable, know what to do if they received this email? This email is from Dr. Less Money, a physician in the practice, asking or stating rather that they have changed their personal bank account and they would like to know if you or they would like you to change their bank routing. An employee probably would think, gosh, I want to do this right away. I don't want to have any disruption in their money. But did they notice that less, that's normally spelled with one S, was spelled with two? Did they even think that it was cyber deception and that the money might be going out to a cyber criminal? Do you have a written policy on changing payroll or vendor electronic fund transfers or ACHs? Here's another one. This one is from the CEO. See you later. And he sends an email to accounts payable saying, I'm out of town and will be tied up most of the day. Our vendor, who we've done business with for years, emailed me saying they have not paid or we have not paid the last invoice. See attached. Can you process the attached invoice today? So very clearly, it's a legitimate quote unquote employee, right? But did you notice that it could be an impersonation in that see you or the last name of later is now spelled with two T's and the company is spelled with an O and not an A. If the employee just followed the instructions of the CEO, the money would be departed with and in many cases non-recoverable. So you need to have an electronic funds transfer policy. It needs to be a written policy that goes over what your employees need to do before accepting or changing electronic funds transfers. All the electronic funds transfers need to be verified in a way other than it was received. So if it came by an email, you need to verify it by phone. Or if it's someone in the office, you can simply walk down the hall, or the employee can walk down the hall and have a conversation. But then you need to document that verification, because if there's ever a question, you have your double check. It also should outline what an employee should do if the verification cannot be made. So let's say the physician involved is on vacation and out of the country for 2 weeks. Are you leaving it up to that employee to decide if this is a legitimate request? Or is there someone that they should be getting help from deciding if that was a legitimate request? And of course, you need to educate all the staff who process your EFTs on the policy. I know of one example where a physician did not receive their monthly payment from the organization they worked for. And when they asked about it, the admin said, "Oh, well, you changed your bank account. I sent you a form that we always use, and you filled it out and sent it back to me." When they got to looking at it a little closer, they found that the email that the form had been sent to was actually the fraudulent email, and the fraudulent email then needed to the fraud criminal actor filled it out and sent it back, and the admin felt they were doing the right thing and changed the routing instructions. Another somewhat new occurrence just is business interruption. Business interruption is something that happens that keeps you from being able to do your business as you normally would. In the context of our program today, it generally has to be a cyber event that is affecting your company, your network, and there's usually subcategories for cyber insurance to pay for it. But this again, it all starts with the cyber incident and your network. Now, there are some other kinds of business interruption coverage that you may have on a BOP policy or a general liability policy that often are affected by a disaster. So, if you're living on the coast and a hurricane comes through and causes you not to be able to have your clinic open for 2 weeks or something, that's not going to be covered by cyber, but it's might be covered by some other insurance. The other type of business interruption is contingent business interruption or business interruption by a supplier. This is basically when something happens on the supplier or the vendor side that causes the interruption. I don't think many of us have to think very hard to come up with a great example. Change Healthcare back in February of this year, when this massive data processing or claims processing organization got hit with a ransom attack, and they were down for weeks and weeks. Um, I don't know if any of you recently got a Change Healthcare notice that your data had been involved in their incident, but those went out earlier this month. One word of caution is many cyber insurance carriers require that you have a written contract that is with the vendor. So if you don't have a written contract, even if the vendor goes down, you may not have contingent business interruption. An example of that, it's probably not a good example, but maybe your internet service provider, all the fiber going to your office building got cut, and it's going to be a week before they can get it restored. If you don't have a contract with your internet service provider, you may or may not have coverage for that event. So when you think about business interruption, two big takeaways are to understand what kind of insurance coverage you have. Is there a waiting period? What kind of documentation requirements are they going to require of you? And you want to make sure that if you do have vendors that are supplying key factors for your practice, that you have a written contract with them. And you may even want to look at that contract for what they may say they will guarantee your uptime. So, real quickly, we've talked about the concern of social engineering, and the fix is training. We've talked about ransom attacks, and the fix is a backup, the 321 that Tony explained, the limitations on who can install software or applications. Cyber deception, the training and policy are really going to be your main fixes. And with business interruption, you're going to want to know what your insurance requires and verify that you have up to date contracts with your vendors. Tony, I'm going to let you walk us through some cyber awareness training uh, options for October.
Sounds great. All right, so this is my favorite topic, and we know that a lot of people are operating on limited budgets. So the first thing I want you to know is that a lot of resources that exist out there are free. So you can review your free resources just online. I'm going to give you a kind of a tip towards the tail end of this presentation on how to Google that or how to use your search engine in order to find those specific resources. The big thing is in October, you want to have a plan to focus on cybersecurity. This next slide, I'm going to go over kind of some really cool tips and tricks on this as well. Ongoing plan. The big thing to take away from this is that as you continue to progress in your cybersecurity posture, everything is always changing. So, what is sometimes a huge cybersecurity threat this year can quickly change. So, for instance, like the QR ishing is something that we're seeing an uptick in. It's not huge yet. Phishing's still one of the biggest ones for sure. But to stay on top of that, do that annual training and just do as much training as you can, possibly like at least once a month would be a great tempo to keep. Document your training of these events. This is great from a compliance side. It just helps to prove that you're taking a lot of these extra steps to train your employees to make sure everyone's aware of these different cyber threats that do exist. And all of these work together to really help increase patient safety behind scenes. So this is one of my favorite new toolkits that just came out. This is from CISA, which is the Cybersecurity Infrastructure Security Agency. The big joke with these guys is that they have security in their name twice, so they take security real seriously. They are a more national approach, so they're looking at all the different industries across the United States And so it includes healthcare as well as, such organizations as like water and energy as well. And so the latest toolkit item they kicked out is this one here that talks about how to stay safe online. So if you're looking for an idea on how to train your employees during the month of October about some of the different cybersecurity threats that exist out there, you can always go ahead and use these four topics to discuss. So use of strong passwords, which we've gone over, turning on multi-factor authentication. This is great for both your personal and your professional life. If you have any accounts that are really critical for you, you want to make sure you turn on MFA for those accounts. If your password does get broken into, which it sometimes will much faster than you think, MFA is really your last stop to get people to prevent people from gaining access to that account. Software updates we went in detail as well as recognizing and reporting phishing. So another resource that exists out there is the 405D program. This one is specific to healthcare. And it focuses on the size of your IT infrastructure, so small, medium, and large. If you don't have very many resources, small is the area that you're going to kind of focus on. Medium and large is for those organizations that have access to a lot more resources. This is an amazing resource for everyone to gain access to. One of my favorite things is something that they call quick shots. And so, if your employees are unfamiliar with the term, you can sometimes go in here, pull up a quick shots video, and it'll go ahead and talk about a very specific topic that you're looking into. So, for us, for this presentation, I wanted to go ahead and do quick shots.
Ever heard of a botnet? It's not a flying insect, but it's just as pesky. Let's dive into what it is and how it works. According to NIST, a botnet is a network of infected computers controlled remotely by cybercriminals. It's like a zombie army, except with computers instead of people. The cybercriminals use Trojan viruses to infect multiple computers and control them from a remote location. This type of breach is considered an advanced persistent threat, also known as an APT, and include botnets, backdoor, and other technically sophisticated attacks that leverage concealed or camouflaged network traffic to bypass typical network protections. Remember to always report any suspicious activity on your computer. When quick action is taken, it can prevent further infiltration throughout your network. And that is your cyber quick shot for today. A quick shot a day keeps the cyber criminal away.
So that's one of the great resources they have. They have this on everything from ransomware all the way down. I chose botnet because it's not a familiar topic that we have, but just wanted to go ahead and help educate everybody on what a botnet is. So just some additional resources that exist out there. So OCR has its website where you can go ahead and find specific guidance about the security rules. The Office of National Coordinator, this is a great website to find the security risk assessment tool where you can perform a security risk assessment on your own organization. TMLT has wonderful resources. We have webinars such as this one that are filed away in the library, as well as podcasts and multiple other resources on TMLT's hub. The TMA has its website with health information technology. It has a tremendous amount of information there as well. And then, of course, this 405D, I just wanted to bring it to everyone's attention one more time. It's a great resource for healthcare specific cybersecurity issues. So, one last additional resource to bring to everyone's attention is OCR is starting to pay a lot more attention towards the cyber awareness and cybersecurity as well. And so they actually have an OCR cyber awareness newsletter. You can sign up on their listserv. And the last takeaway, so if you are trying to find some free resources, one of the best things to do is to pull up your favorite search engine. Go ahead and punch in free 2024 cybersecurity awareness resources, and you may have actually access to a lot more resources than you originally thought. There's a lot of different organizations that do not do free resources throughout the year, but during October, they'll provide them just as a way of trying to help educate our population. And with that, any questions? Kathy, you're mute.
Sorry about that. Thanks, Tony. I did on the one list of resources, the 405D had an incorrect link. The way to find them is 405d.hhs.gov. So just something as you get around to looking for those resources. You can still download the um, soft or the resources. For some reason, it looks like the correct. Let's see, prepare and recover. Looks like one of the resources is not downloading. I'll see if I can find that real quickly while Tony is speaking. Um, just a reminder, you will receive an email that will have a link to your CME evaluation and a reminder that CME emails certificates will be emailed out in about 10 business days. Tony, there is a question about having purchased new laptops for their physicians, and they're wondering about what kind of security software might be appropriate.
That is a great question. Some of the big things that you're going to want to look into is some form of antivirus, anti-malware uh, software, and some of the other software that you may want to look into is, such a thing as firewalls. Those are also great, depending on how complex your IT infrastructure is. A lot of the times when we get this question, you're looking for like a specific name brand. And I can tell you that they do cycle in and out of who's in the top spot year over year between probably the top five. And so my biggest suggestion is when you're looking into this, you would want to again use your search engine of your choice and search for top enterprise security. Enterprise is going to give you like, or small business is another really good term, or medium sized business, this depending on the size of your business operations. And it's going to give you a breakdown of all the different cybersecurity platforms that are out there, ranging from extremely affordable in some instances all the way down to some of the more expensive versions. So you just have to kind of pick and choose what's good for you. Total security systems are also really good because they typically will look at spyware, malware, VPN access is sometimes included in with some of these services, and that stands for virtual private network. And there's a couple of other uh, security platforms that I have ran into that actually will work as extensions for your browser, and it'll help to protect you as you're maneuvering through the internet as well. So there's a lot of ways to protect yourself. It's all about layering it, kind of like an onion. So the more you have, usually the better off you are. But again, you want to double check and test some of these before you implement them because some of them do slow down your IT system. And that's another really great takeaway is you can always ask for a 30-day trial to see if that specific solution is going to work for you or if you need to find a different solution for your IT infrastructure. But great question. Is there any other questions? The presentation will be recorded and will be available later to view. And yes, that is true. You'll have access to this as a recording at a later time.
The email that you receive will actually give you a link to the recording, which you're free to share with your staff or others.
And is there any other questions out there? Please feel free to type them in.
don't see any more questions coming in. I would just thank everyone for their time today and encourage you to have a very exciting uh, cybersecurity awareness month. Maybe that's a once a week you do something. I actually saw one suggestion that a practice was going to do phishing emails every day for the month. And they were going to track how many a practice got right. And whoever got the most right, they were actually going to give a free day off. Um, that's what I would call an incentive. Tony and my emails are both on the slide showing now, as well as cyber@tmlt.org, which you can certainly always reach out to us with questions after the program. Seeing no other questions, and yes, you can email Tony directly with a follow-up question. Uh, just popped up, but seeing no other questions, you all have a great rest of your afternoon, and we will hopefully see you again at our next webinar. Thanks, everyone.
Thank everyone for your time.